السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. وأقيموا الصلاة وآتوا الزكاة وما تقدموا لأنفسكم من خير تجدوه عند الله إن الله بما تعملون بصير. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني أفقه قولي والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. ثم أما بعد. This is ayah number 110 of Surah al-Baqarah. In the previous ayah we heard about the intent, the want of many from among the people of the book who would like to see nothing more than us return back. وَدَّ كَثِيرٌ مِّنْ أَهْلِ الْكِتَابِ لَوْ يَرُدُّونَكُم مِّن بَعْدِ إِيمَانِكُمْ كُفَّارًا حَسَدًا مِّنْ عِندِ أَنفُسِهِمْ مِّن بَعْدِ مَا تَبَيَّنَ لَهُمُ الْحَقُّ. Actually, I don't think we discussed this ayah enough, so I'll talk a little bit about it. Many from the people of the book would really want that hopefully you would turn away after you have iman back into being disbelievers. Because of what? حَسَدًا مِّنْ عِنْدِ أَنفُسِهِمْ. Out of a jealousy that emanates from within themselves. مِّن بَعْدِ مَا تَبَيَّنَ لَهُمُ الْحَقُّ. Even after the truth has been clarified to them. فَاعْفُوا وَاصْفَحُوا. Then continually pardon and turn the page. Afu in Arabic is loving forgiveness. In other words, your attitude should remain soft towards them no matter how much hate they show towards you. This is a Madani ayah. The ayat of qital are coming against the mushrikun, but a different foreign policy is being talked about with people of the book. With the people of the book at this time, what should you maintain? Fa'fu wasfahu. With the Christians and the Jews, pardon them lovingly, even if they say hateful things, and keep turning the page. In other words, overlooking. I think in Punjabi there's the expression mitti pao, right? Mitti pao. When you turn the page, I think in English they say bury the hatchet. Don't let bygones be bygones, if you will, right? So fa'fu wasfahu. Until hatta ya'ti Allahu bi amrihi, until Allah comes with His decision, meaning until a new policy is revealed on how to deal with them, this is how you should deal with them. Even if they express this kind of hatred and they want you to leave your deen out of jealousy. This jealousy that's being talked about, first of all, it's alluding to the fact that a message has come to someone other than Bani Israel. Right? Why isn't it one of ours that received a message? And how come this message keeps getting stronger and stronger? And how come they keep gaining more and more support? So hasada min indi anfusihim. Anyhow, Allah says, Inna Allah ala kulli shayin qadir. No doubt it is Allah that's in complete control over all things. In other words, their hatred, their jealousy, it's not going to cause you any harm. Everything's still in Allah's control. And the ayah after it is really incredibly connected. وَأَقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةَ وَآتُوا الزَّكَاةَ. You've heard this many times before. Establish the prayer and give zakah. وَمَا تُقَدِّمُوا لِأَنفُسِكُم مِّنْ خَيْرٍ. And whatever you send forward, whatever you invest in for yourselves out of good deeds. قَدَّمَ in Arabic, to put something ahead. So whatever you send ahead, meaning, you know how you say you're making an advance deposit? You put something for future periods, future time. In Arabic they say, I'm putting it ahead. Meaning I'm not going to use it right now, I'll use it later when I get there. So time is given the image of travel. When I get ahead in terms of time. So when we spend for the sake of Allah and we do good things, we're depositing rewards ahead. When we get before Allah, then we reap those rewards. So He says, وَمَا تُقَدِّمُوا لِأَنفُسِكُم مِّنْ خَيْرٍ. Whatever investment you make for yourself for the future of any good deed at all. The two big good deeds He mentioned, which is أَقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةَ وَآتُوا الزَّكَاةَ. Those are the two main ones. But then He says, whatever else you do. What does He say about them? تَجِدُوهُ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ. You will find them with Allah. They're not going anywhere. They're not going anywhere. The question though is, what does this have to do with the Ahlul Kitab having hatred towards us and that they would want us to turn into kuffar? Right after that Allah says, أَقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةَ وَآتُوا الزَّكَاةَ وَمَا تُقَدِّمُوا لِأَنفُسِكُم مِّنْ خَيْرٍ تَجِدُوهُ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ. Why? Why this focus on our deeds? You know what happens a lot of times? I've even met Muslims, there's a very common attitude among Muslims today. Oh, they're out to get us. You know what they're doing? You know what they're planning? You know, I met this brother one time after a dars I gave, and he's like, you know, they're building concentration camps for Muslims in Texas. I've been collecting YouTube videos and other documents, and I have a lot of proof. I'm like, brother, even if that's true, what are you going to do about it? We have to prepare. Prepare how? I don't know, but we have to do something. We have to tell people. Tell people what? What are you going to do? We become so obsessed with conspiracy theory and how they're going to take over the world and all of this stuff. You know what we lose sight of? The good deeds we're supposed to really invest in. No matter what anybody else does, they cannot bring us any harm except if Allah wills. And so a lot of times we become so obsessed with what the kuffar are doing against Islam that we even forget what we're supposed to do ourselves. Allah says, don't lose your priorities. أقيموا الصلاة آتوا الزكاة ما تقدموا لأنفسكم من خير تجدوه عند الله إن الله بما تعملون بصير. Allah is in full view of what they're doing, but now He says Allah is in full view especially of what you're doing. First He told us their activities and what's going on inside their hearts. They have hasad inside their hearts. We cannot see inside their heart. Allah looked inside their heart and told us they have hasad. Allah told us what their intentions are even if they didn't spell them out to us. But Allah says, even though He sees all of that, He lets us know that what is He watching carefully? What we're going to do. What good deeds are we obsessed with? SubhanAllah. It's just that don't lose sight of priorities. Don't lose sight of what you're really on this earth for. وَقَالُوا لَن يَدْخُلَ الْجَنَّةَ إِلَّا مَنْ كَانَ هُودًا أَوْ نَصَارًا. See now, when it comes about, you're going to get your rewards where? In Jannah. When that discussion reaches them, they say, no, you're not getting the Jannah. You guys, Muslims, no, you guys, nowadays they call us devil worshippers and all kinds of fun names they give us, right? Before in old high school textbooks in America, like in New York, when I used to go to high school, I came straight from the Muslim world to go to high school in New York, and our textbook, World Religions, under Global Studies, Muslims worship the moon god. Right? So we used to be moon worshippers, now we're devil worshippers. It keeps changing every few seasons. Eventually they'll realize, but let them try all the other options out first for us. But anyhow, Allah Azza wa Jalla, when this word reaches them, that Allah is giving us the promise of paradise, they come out boasting and they say, and they still say to this day, وَقَالُوا لَن يَدْخُلَ الْجَنَّةَ. No one's going to enter paradise, إِلَّا مَنْ كَانَ هُودًا أَوْ نَصَارًا, except for the one who's either Jewish or Christian. Which is interesting, because this statement was not being made by a great many of them. This was either Hudan or Nasara, by the way. Allah is combining two statements. The way it's understood by scholars is the Christians said, only Christians will enter paradise. The Jews said, only Jews will enter paradise. And this will become clearer later on when the ayah comes, وَقَالَتِ الْيَهُودِ لَيْسَتِ النَّصَارَ عَلَى شَيْءٍ وَقَالَتِ النَّصَارَ لَيْسَتِ الْيَهُودِ عَلَى شَيْءٍ. The Christians say the Jews stand on nothing. And the Jews say the Christians stand on nothing. Right? And Allah didn't refute either of them because they're both right. So, it's an interesting nuance in the ayah. But anyhow, here Allah Azza wa Jalla says, لَن يَدْخُلَ الْجَنَّةَ إِلَّا مَنْ كَانَ هُدًى أَوْ نَصَارًا. No one will enter paradise except for the one who's either Jew or Christian. What's incredible is, to this day, one of the things they talk about that is intolerant about Islam is they'll come to Muslims and say, do you believe only Muslims will enter paradise? Do you believe Christians can go to heaven too? And the Muslim will say, well, I don't know about you personally, but whoever does shirk in Allah, shirk is an unforgivable crime. And whoever knows about his messenger and still disbelieves, that's pretty strong. So I'm not judging a person, but the act of shirk, Allah has passed a verdict. It's not my verdict. You guys are such an intolerant religion. You believe others are going to hell. You ever talk to a pastor about who's going to hell? You ever talk to any of them about who's going to have success in the afterlife? They're very exclusive in their religions. They don't believe Muslims are going to paradise. Ask your Christian friend who thinks Islam is intolerant, what do you think Muslims, where do you think Muslims are going? What are they going to tell you? They'll tell you flat to your face. They will tell you flat to your face. The only time I didn't get a straight answer, I was talking to a rabbi one time. What do you think? Muslims, paradise? What do you think? Well, I don't know. The concept of paradise a little, because they've even watered down the concept of paradise, many denominations among them, yet many others do still believe in a concept of paradise. Now, this is not to say that we should have a spiteful attitude towards them, because the ayah before even mentioned lovingly pardoning them. Fa'fu. That's even when they have hateful attitudes towards us. Nowadays, a lot of Muslims have spiteful attitudes towards Jews and Christians, even if they haven't said anything to us. We just see a non-Muslim and we're like, أَشِدَّاءُ عَلَى الْكُفَّارِ رُحَمَاء بَيْنَهُم. That's about the only Quran we know. Right? Intense, severe against the kuffar, merciful towards each other. Even though, let's be honest, we're not even merciful to each other. We're just mean all around, right? But the point I'm trying to get across, though, is our attitude towards Christians and Jews has to be the best attitude. You know where fa'fu wasfahu is used in the Quran? It's used when you're dealing with your wife, with your family. That's where these words are used. Now they're being used for people of the book. We have to have really excellent dealings with them. Because if this book is true, the proof of this will not come from arguments, it will come from our character, our dealings with them. The most effective tool in Christian preaching missionary work is not the Bible. You know what it is? Their behavior, their character, their humanitarian efforts, them going to villages and helping out and providing medical services and this and that and the other, their character. That's what appeals to people. The first thing that turns people off from Islam, you know what it is? It's not the Quran. It's the behavior of Muslims. It's the attitude of Muslims. It's the work ethic of Muslims. It's how we leave our bathrooms in the office after we make wudu. It's how we park our cars in front of their lawns on Jum'ah. It's the behavior of Muslims. It turns them off. Why would they even be interested? If that's their behavior, obviously they're getting this from somewhere. They think they're getting this from Islam. Our misbehavior is an insult to Islam itself. That's what it is to them. That's how they see it. This is who we are. SubhanAllah. So here Allah Azza wa Jal gives this attitude of theirs. Nobody's entering paradise except the Jew and the Christian. Tilka amaniyuhum. These are their wishful thoughts. In other words, these whimsical thoughts are not based on any research they did or any study. This is what they were raised with. They never questioned it and they're holding on to it. This is what amani is. Wishful thinking, not based on any knowledge. Qul hatu burhanakum. Then ask them the toughest question of all. Hatu burhanakum. Bring your undeniable proof. Go ahead. I'd like to see your evidence that you're the only ones going to paradise. In kuntum sadiqeen. If in fact you're truthful. In other words, there are two challenges in the Quran. One is a challenge to the people of the book to bring their proofs, if they really want to get to the truth, to the bottom line. And on the other hand, they're also asked to bring a challenge against the Quran. They're asked to do so. So when they write against the Quran, when they speak against the Quran, they're doing what Allah told them. Now the question is, are we ready for their attacks or not? Their criticisms or not? But this is an invitation Allah Himself gave them. Bring a surah like it. If this was from other than Allah, there would be lots of contradictions in it. Allah says this in the Quran. So they make websites about how there are contradictions in the Quran. Let them make it. It's good. Because the sincere among them who are actually making this effort, when they get to the truth, and this will be an undeniable proof for them. But we're the ones who have to clarify this proof. Finally, ayah number 112 for the day. بَلَا مَنْ أَسْلَمَ وَجْهَهُ لِلَّهِ وَهُوَ مُحْسِنٌ. However, rather, on the contrary, not anyone just enters paradise, the one who submits his face before Allah. Allah didn't just even say that he's Muslim. Man kana musliman. He says, Man aslama wajhahu lillahi. Who submitted his face to Allah. Now submitting the face to Allah, you know what that's an image of? It's an image of sajda. The imagery in the ayah is that of sajda. And what had happened among many branches of al-Yahud wa Nasara is, of the ibadat that they had abandoned was which one? They had abandoned sajda. They had abandoned sajda. Very few denominations among them still have sajda. They still do. Some Jesuits do. Some clans of the Christians in Israel, for example, have sajda. Some Orthodox branches of Judaism still have sajda. But the vast majority of them don't have sajda anymore. The first thing Allah calls them to is sajda. بَلَا مَنْ أَسْلَمَ وَجْهَهُ لِلَّهِ. And obviously when you say that, who's left in the immediate vicinity? Only the Muslims. The other thing here is face. The face in Arabic expression is an image of pride. Your pride lies in your face. So for example, when you're humiliated, iswaddat al-wujuh, iswaddat al-wujuh, the faces became black. What that means is people were humiliated. Yasumunakum, they were blackening your faces. In Arabic implies for Bani Israel that Fir'aun used to humiliate you. They used to blacken your faces. Now here Allah says, Man aslama wajhahu, who submitted their face also implies whoever submitted their ego, whoever submitted their pride, whoever gave up their self-interest before Allah. That's a Muslim. That's the one who submitted themselves before Allah. Why was pride important to mention? Because that was the thing keeping them from coming to Islam. Because it was too much a demand on their pride that they would accept an Arab as a messenger. So بَلَا مَنْ أَسْلَمَ وَجْهَهُ لِلَّهِ وَهُوَ مُحْسِنٌ, while he excels. In other words, the word muhsin here, implying the messenger's definition, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, أَن تَعْبُدَ اللَّهَ كَأَنَّكَ تَرَاهُ, right? That you worship Allah as though you see Him. Acknowledging that the only way one can give up their pride is when they acknowledge all the time the presence of Allah. Because when you compare yourself to the greatness of Allah, obviously you'll bring your ego down. When you're not conscious of Allah, obviously your ego will get inflated. So who's the only one who'll be able to truly submit their face to Allah? وَهُوَ مُحْسِن, the one who reaches the state of ihsan, the one who excels. فَلَهُ أَجْرُهُ عِنْدَ رَبِّهِ, then he alone, he exclusively will have his reward, his compensation with his master. وَلَا خَوْفٌ عَلَيْهِمْ وَلَا هُمْ يَحْزَنُونَ, and no fear will be upon them, nor will they be the ones to grieve. The ayah went from singular to plural immediately. The first part was, فَلَهُ أَجْرُهُ عِنْدَ رَبِّهِ, he will have his reward with his master. Then he says, وَلَا خَوْفٌ عَلَيْهِمْ وَلَا هُمْ يَحْزَنُونَ. This is a beautiful transition. In dunya, you may be alone in your efforts. You may be alone in coming to Islam. And of course, the Bani Israel, they didn't come to Islam in groups. They came one by one, so they might stand alone. But when they come into the community of believers, they're not alone, they are plural. And their reward, on Judgment Day, the reward, by the way, is individual. كُلُّهُمْ آتِيهِ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ فَرْدًا. But when we make it into paradise, we're together. فَلَهُمْ أَجْرُهُمْ عِنْدَ رَبِّهِمْ. وَلَا خَوْفٌ عَلَيْهِمْ. Here's it, لَا خَوْفٌ عَلَيْهِمْ وَلَا هُمْ يَحْزَنُونَ. And he alludes at the end, and I'll conclude with that, وَلَا هُمْ يَحْزَنُونَ. They won't be the ones to grieve. The hum here is used in Arabic, it's a principle called al-ithbat ala ghayr al-fa'il. It's alluding to other than them grieving. In other words, Allah said it in a way that, to say it in English would be, it won't be they that'll be grieving. In parentheses, it's like Allah is saying, but anyone other than them will in fact be grieving. They will be the ones to grieve. So Allah alluded to that, so in the end they get the point. Save yourself a lot of grief and submit your face before Allah. May Allah make us of those who count among those who give their face, they submit their face before Allah and their pride before Allah. And may Allah include all of us among the muhsineen. Barakallahu li wa lakum fil Qur'an al-Hakim wa nafa'ni wa iyyakum bil ayati wa dhikr al-Hakim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. وقالت اليهود ليست النصارى على شيء وقالت النصارى ليست اليهود على شيء وهم يتلون الكتاب كذلك قال الذين لا يعلمون مثل قولهم فالله يحكم بينهم يوم القيامة فيما كانوا فيه يختلفون رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه ثم أما بعد. We reached ayah number 113 of Surah al-Baqarah. Before we appreciate fully the benefit of what Allah is saying in this ayah, a quick reminder of what came in the ayah before. بَلَا مَنْ أَسْلَمَ وَجْهَهُ لِلَّهِ وَهُوَ مُحْسِنٌ. Rather, whoever submitted their face to Allah, meaning their ego, their pride, their entire self to Allah, and they excelled in their deen, muhsin. Ihsan is the ultimate state where one is concerned with everything that they do for the sake of Allah. So you're most conscious of yourself. You're extremely conscious of yourself. That's the point I wanted to highlight before I talk about ayah number 113. Let's look at why. وَقَالَتِ الْيَهُودُ لَيْسَتِ النَّصَارَى عَلَى شَيْءٍ وَقَالَتِ النَّصَارَى لَيْسَتِ الْيَهُودُ عَلَى شَيْءٍ. The Jews said that the Christians, the Nasara, they are based on nothing. They have no basis. They're deeply flawed. وَقَالَتِ النَّصَارَى لَيْسَتِ الْيَهُودُ عَلَى شَيْءٍ. And the Christians said the Jews have no basis. They're flawed religion. وَهُمْ يَتْلُونَ الْكِتَابِ. And it's ironic that they both are the ones that are reading the book. And what Allah is highlighting here is they're reading the same book, Al-Kitab. They're not two different books. Because what was given to Isa alayhi salam is a completion of what was given to Musa alayhi salam. Even in the Christian tradition, the Old and the New Testament, right? وَهُمْ يَتْلُونَ الْكِتَابِ. Now the thing here is they're obsessed not with themselves but with somebody else. What is a muhsin supposed to be obsessed with? His own behavior in front of Allah. How he or she ranks before Allah. But they are already very confident that they're okay with Allah. They don't need to be worried about that. When you're so clear that you yourself are saved, you yourself have already attained righteousness as high as it could go, then obviously your mental pursuit will not be about how to better yourself. You'll only be concerned with what to point out about others. So now they're obsessed with pointing out things about others. But in the previous ayah Allah mentioned, no, you have to reach the state of ihsan. وَهُوَ مُحْسِنٌ فَلَهُ أَجْرُهُ عِنْدَ رَبِّهِ وَلَا خَوْفٌ عَلَيْهِمْ وَلَا هُمْ يَحْزَنُونَ. The other interesting thing here is Allah didn't negate what they said. One group said, the Jews said Christians are based on nothing, they have no basis. The Jews said the Christians have no basis. And it's like Allah is agreeing, sure, you're both right. He doesn't disagree with either one of them. وَهُمْ يَتْلُونَ الْكِتَابِ. And yet it is they who read the book. Here's something else that Imam al-Alusi rahimahullah pointed out. Is that in this part of the ayah, it is they who read the book. In other words, they read the book only to find out who is not based on anything. They have no basis. So they're reading their book and trying to find evidence, proof that the Christians are deviant. And the other is trying to find out evidence and proof that the Jews are deviant, and that's their entire religion. Their entire religion is just finding out proofs for who makes what deviant. Sound familiar? Right? When we reduce Islam to just this practice, just saying, oh, this group, they're based on nothing. That group, they're based on nothing. And what's your proof? My proof is here in the book. Look at this ayah. Because of this ayah, these people are deviant, those people are deviant, these people are going to hell, those people are going to hell. This is the exact opposite of what you're supposed to be doing. And so this practice is a practice of ignorance. So look at how the ayah ends. كَذَلِكَ قَالَ الَّذِينَ لَا يَعْلَمُونَ مِثْلَ قَوْلِهِمْ. This is just like the speech of those who knew nothing. They said things exactly like this. People that were totally ignorant said exactly similar kinds of things. It's interesting, Allah compares people who read the book. Now people who read the book are obviously knowledgeable. And in the same ayah, He's comparing them to people who have no knowledge. Obviously, if they have no knowledge, it means they read no book. In other words, He's saying even though they read the book, they are still ignorant. They still don't have any knowledge. They don't have the knowledge they're supposed to have. And so He says, فَاللَّهُ يَحْكُمُ بَيْنَهُمْ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ. Then it is Allah. He will judge between them on Judgment Day. Another very important piece of the ayah. They're so obsessed with judging the other, not realizing that the judge in the end is Allah Azza wa Jal. And here just a subtlety that Muslims should also understand. We don't speak about the fate of the Christians or the Jews or the Hindus or the atheists. We know already very well, Inna Dina Inda Allah al-Islam. Allah doesn't tell us to point fingers at the Jews and the Christians and things like that. What He tells us to point fingers at is shirk itself, kufr itself. Whoever does kufr, this will be their fate. You personally, I don't know how you're going to end up. I don't know what, you might come to Islam later on. I don't know what exactly you believe. I'm not going to generalize. These are the principles on which we stand. In other words, Allah gave us knowledge by which we can judge actions, we can judge ideas, we can judge beliefs, but we still don't judge people. That judgment is reserved for Allah. That judgment even is reserved for Allah. So Allah says Allah will be the one who judges between them. فَاللَّهُ يَحْكُمُ بَيْنَهُمْ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ. Allah will be the decisive judge between them on Judgment Day. فِيمَا كَانُوا فِيهِ يَخْتَلِفُونَ. In all of the things they used to be disagreeing about. All of those disagreements will be resolved. All of them will be dealt with clearly. وَمَنْ أَظْلَمُ مِمَّنْ مَنَعَ مَسَاجِدَ اللَّهِ. This is early Madani surah. Like I mentioned, most of this surah is early Madani. And in this time, of course, the Jews and Christians, the Muslims are coming into contact with the Jewish and the Christian community. The focus, of course, in Baqarah is the Jewish community. The focus in Ali Imran will be the Christian community. But at the same time, we shouldn't forget that there's a third party, which the Messenger ﷺ was first in contact with, who still have their animosity towards Allah's Messenger. Those are the Quraysh. So now you've got three groups of people. The Jews, the Christians, and the Mushrikun. Now Allah reminds us of those two groups, but He also takes us back to the third group, which is the Mushrikun. And He says about them, وَمَنْ أَظْلَمُ. Who could be more of a wrongdoer? مِمَّنْ مَنَعَ مَسَاجِدَ اللَّهِ. Than the one who forbade the masajid of Allah, meaning forbade people from going to the houses of Allah. مَنْ مَنَعَ مَسَاجِدَ اللَّهِ أَنْ يُذْكَرَ فِي هَسْمُهُ وَسَعَى فِي خَرَابِهَا. That Allah's name should be mentioned in them, and they made efforts to corrupt them. Now Allah didn't just specifically talk, even though most Mufassirun say these ayat are hinting towards the Kaaba, and the Mushrikun stopping the Muslims from coming to the Kaaba, and then putting idols in there, therefore causing corruption in them. But Allah, interestingly, in the ayah didn't say Masjid Allah. He said Masajid Allah. What's Masajid? Plural, it's all masjids. Allah is saying, who could be a worse person than the one who forbids people from going to the houses of Allah? Forbids the Masajid of Allah. And interestingly, the maf'ul bihi is not mentioned. Forbids who? Allah doesn't say mana'a an-nasa an yadhhabu an yazuru masajid Allah. He forbids people from going to the masjids of Allah. The phrase literally says forbids the masjid of Allah. What that implies is it forbids people from going to the masjid. What that also implies is that the person forbids the masjid from doing what it's supposed to do. The masjid has certain functions. It's supposed to be able to do certain things. And this person makes sure that the masjid does not get to do those things. مَنْ مَنَعَ مَسَاجِدَ اللَّهِ. It's as though Allah is saying the masjid itself wants to do an act, and this person is forbidding that act. Right? Now what are the acts that this person forbids? أَنْ يُذْكَرَ فِي هَسْمُهُ. That his name should be mentioned in them. His name, Allah's name, should be mentioned in the masjid. And this, dhikru, ism rabbik, ism rabbina, this mention of Allah's name, the name of our master, some Sahaba interpreted this to mean the Quran itself. Because the best way to remember the name of Allah, sabbih isma rabbika al-a'la, fasabbih bismi rabbika al-azim, this is Quran. So they stop Quran from being taught, stop Quran from being recited. Others believe this to mean that the houses of worship in the Christian and the Jewish communities were originally masajid. And then Allah's tawheed was refused in those masajid. It was stopped. So then Allah says that Allah's name was not allowed to be mentioned. And then the other thing is there is a sect among the Christians, and there's also a major population within the Jews who talk about God as someone who shall not be named. God shall not, he who shall not be named, right? And they speak about how His name is so holy and so sanctified, you can't even call Him by His name. And so Allah says, who could be a worse wrongdoer than someone who refuses to allow for Allah's name to be mentioned, to remember. So Allah is basically alluding to the fact that this is one of the tricks of shaitan. You take away the, فَأَنْسَاهُمْ ذِكْرَ اللَّهِ, like the Quran tells us. Shaitan, إِسْتَهْوَذَ عَلَيْهِمُ الشَّيْطَانِ فَأَنْسَاهُمْ ذِكْرَ اللَّهِ. Shaitan basically wrapped them around his finger and made them forget the remembrance of Allah. So to convince them that Allah's name is so awesome, you shouldn't even say it. What an amazing trick. So, أُولَٰئِكَ مَا كَانَ لَهُمْ أَن يَدْخُلُوهَا إِلَّا خَائِفِينَ. These people, they deserve nothing else except that when they enter the masajid, they should enter in a state of fear. This has been again interpreted in multiple ways. One of them is that those masajid, they were supposed to be masajid, but now there's no mention of Allah in them. Instead of becoming a place of peace, those places become a place of terror and fear. What's interesting in Christian tradition, if you look at the architecture in Christian tradition, right? They stain their windows. You notice that in the Catholic tradition specifically. They keep light from coming inside. And they specifically design windows in a way that the only light that comes in is the one that shines on the statue of Mary or the statue of Jesus. So you feel like you're in the dark and the only light is over there. That's kind of the design structure of the Christian, the church, the old church tradition. A lot of churches even today, there's no windows. Like some sects actually, they don't allow for the windows. Like Jehovah's Witness, if you notice one of their temples, you won't see any windows there. But what's really interesting is, one of the first things you'll notice, especially in classical church architecture, is it's terrifying. It's very dark, and dark stone, and large towers, and dark corners, there's not enough light inside. So this is one thing that it may be alluding to. The other thing, the ulama that believe this ayah is talking about the mushrikun who stop people from entering the house of Allah. Allah is saying, no, they have terrified the believers. What they deserve is, they're the ones who shouldn't be allowed to enter the Kaaba, and if they do ever enter, they should be terrified. أُولَٰئِكَ مَا كَانَ لَهُمْ أَن يَدْخُلُوهَا إِلَّا خَائِفِينَ. In other words, the table should completely be turned. What Allah is alluding to here is, right now the Makkans are in charge of the Kaaba, but a time is coming where instead of the believers being afraid to go to Makkah, it will be the kuffar that will be afraid to go to Makkah. And so Allah says, مَا كَانَ لَهُمْ أَن يَدْخُلُوهَا إِلَّا خَائِفِينَ. It is not becoming of them at all to enter it except in a state of fear. لَهُمْ فِي الدُّنْيَا خِزْيٌ. For these people in this dunya, in the world, is humiliation, especially for them. So Allah guarantees in this ayah, for example, the humiliation of the mushrikun. It hasn't even happened yet. This is early Medina. They haven't been humiliated yet. This is actually, many even consider these ayahs. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. ومن أظلم ممن منع مساجد الله أن يذكر فيها اسمه وسعى في خرابها أولئك ما كان لهم أن يدخلوها إلا خائفين لهم في الدنيا خزي ولهم في الآخرة عذاب عظيم ولله المشرق والمغرب فأينما تولوا فثم وجه الله إن الله واسع عليم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي فالحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. We spoke already about ayah number 113, where Allah spoke about the Jews and the Christians and them blaming or putting the fingers of blame on each other. And Allah then saying, كَذَلِكَ قَالَ الَّذِينَ لَا يَعْلَمُونَ مِثْلَ قَوْلِهِمْ. And this is the same kind of thing that people that have no knowledge say, just like them. And so Allah will make a decision between them on Judgment Day, فِيمَا كَانُوا فِيهِ يَخْتَلِفُونَ, in whatever they used to disagree with each other in. But now, remember, three groups were mentioned. Those three groups were the Jews, the Christians, and then Allah didn't specify the third group. He just said, just like those who don't have knowledge, they say this too. So it was essentially three groups that were kind of alluded to, two explicitly and one implicitly. Kind of a description was given without a name to them, people without knowledge. Now one hint towards that is, of course, that the people that had books with them are considered people of knowledge, which is Jews and Christians. And the mushrikun of Mecca were not people of books, nor of reading and writing much. So they were considered the other, those who don't know, which is why the word ummiyin is used for them also, the unlettered. الَّذِينَ لَا يَعْلَمُونَ, those who have no knowledge. So it's kind of alluding to the Meccans in that sense. But then that ishara, that pointing becomes explicit in the next ayah. And look how it's getting closer and closer to being explicit. Allah says, وَمَنْ أَظْلَمُ, who could be a worse wrongdoer, مِمَّنْ مَنَعَ مَسَاجِدَ اللَّهِ, than the one who forbade from the masajid of Allah, the houses of worship. By the way, masjid in Arabic, ism dharf, is a place where sajda is done. Masjid and sajda have the same origin. So it's the place and the time of sajda actually. So masjid is the place where you do sajda, which is of course the masjid. And also the time at which you do sajda is also called masjid. Because an ism dharf in Arabic is a place and a time. So min mana'a masajid Allah has two implications actually. One, the one who forbids people from entering or being able to utilize the houses of Allah, the masajid of Allah, so they could do sajda to Allah in those houses. And the second is actually they forbid people from specific times that they would have done sajda. And the most popular time to do sajda is the Hajj, where the masses of people, the masjid is the fullest, especially the house of Allah, and the most sajda is done then. So it's alluding not just on the one hand to the act of sajda and the location of masajid, but even the Hajj itself. And why is this important? Because the Muslims have just been expelled from Mecca, and if they go back and try to make Hajj, etc., it's very difficult, if not impossible, for them to do so, because they have enemies over there. So now Allah is alluding to that, saying, who could be a worse wrongdoer than the one who forbids from the masajid of Allah? But notice it's plural, masajid, which means it includes not just al-Masjid al-Haram, which is the original masjid, but all masajid. So it's still in that sense a little bit more general. فَمَنْ أَظْلَمُ مِمَّنْ مَنَعَ مَسَاجِدَ اللَّهِ أَنْ يُذْكَرَ فِيهَا اسْمُهُ, that his name should be mentioned in it. That his name should be mentioned in it. And here we learn by this kind of context the fundamental purpose of the masjid. ذِكْرُ اسْمِ اللَّهِ, ذِكْرُ اسْمِ اللَّهِ. The fundamental purpose of the masjid is to remember the name of Allah, to remember Allah. And this is talked about a few places in the Quran. فِي بُيُوتٍ أَذِنَ اللَّهُ أَنْ يُذْكَرَ فِيهَا اسْمُهُ, in homes in which Allah has given permission that His name should be mentioned, that He should be remembered. Right? So this idea of like salah is even the remembrance of Allah's name. It begins with even Allahu Akbar, Al-Fatiha, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Mumtali, as-Salat Mumtali'ah, Bismillah. It's full of the name of Allah. Right? So this idea of forbidding the remembrance of Allah, أَنْ يُذْكَرَ فِيهَا اسْمُهُ وَسَعَى فِي خَرَابِهَا. And who could be a worse wrongdoer that number one, forbids people from the masajid of Allah, that His name be mentioned in it. And second, he makes efforts in corrupting them. Not only does he stop people from coming to them, well, if he's stopping them from coming to them, he's in control of them. And what does he want to do? He makes efforts towards their corruption. وَسَعَى فِي خَرَابِهَا أُولَٰئِكَ مَا كَانَ لَهُمْ. These people, there's nothing appropriate for them whatsoever. It is not becoming for them except أَنْ يَدْخُلُوهَا إِلَّا خَائِفِينَ, that they should enter the masajid, them, except in states of fear. These kinds of people, all they deserve is that they should be the ones entering the masjids in a state of fear. Why? Because actually in the context of the seerah, they inflicted fear, they induced fear onto the believers from entering the houses of Allah. And Allah is saying it should be the other way around. They should be the ones afraid to enter the house of Allah because of the crimes they've committed against His houses. لَهُمْ فِي الدُّنْيَا خِزْيٌ, for them in this world there is humiliation. So Allah is already alluding to the fact that the people who have done that, in the seerah's case the Quraysh, even in dunya, humiliation is about to come for them. So it's kind of a clue towards the Fath of Makkah. وَلَهُمْ فِي الْآخِرَةِ عَذَابٌ عَظِيمٌ. And in the Akhirah they have enormous or great punishment also, especially for them. وَلِلَّهِ الْمَشْرِقُ وَالْمَغْرِبُ. And to Allah alone, the East and the West belong. Allah says to Allah alone, the East and the West belong. This is important because the ayat that are coming will help us understand why this clue is being dropped now. The Muslims have moved from one place to another. And, they might feel bad that they left the house of Allah, they left the house that Ibrahim alayhi salam built, and now they're all the way in Medina. But Allah is saying, actually, that land belongs to Allah, but then again, both the East and the West belong to Allah. You're still in service to Allah. And the masajid of Allah, because both the East and West belong to Allah, you should be establishing masajid wherever you may be, because it's only to Allah that all of the East and all of the West belong. وَلِلَّهِ الْمَشْرِقُ وَالْمَغْرِبُ. فَأَيْنَمَا تُوَلُّوا. Then wherever you may turn, فَثَمَّ وَجْهُ اللَّهِ. Then there you find the face of Allah. There you find the face of Allah. In other words, there's no turning away from Allah. Allah is, looking towards His pleasure. This, by the way, the other thing, wajhullah even implies mardatillah, the pleasure of Allah. It's a figure of speech, right? So wherever you may turn, you'll find the face of Allah, or the direction really of Allah, or the pleasure of Allah. You know why this is important? Because a few ayat later, we're going to start reading the ayat of the change of the qibla. The change of the qibla. And the Muslims have been facing a certain way to make salah towards Aqsa. But once the change occurs, they're going to be praying towards Makkah. And this big change, they're already being prepared for it even before the ayat have come, because Allah says, wherever you turn, the direction itself is not the fundamental thing. The fundamental thing is that you will be, with good intent, facing or heading, intending towards Allah. فَثَمَّ وَجْهُ اللَّهِ. And then he says, well, إِنَّ اللَّهَ وَاسِعٌ عَلِيمٌ. Certainly Allah is encompassing, wasi', and all knowledgeable, wasi'un alim. So He encompasses the lands. He encompasses our intentions. So don't restrict Allah to one house. And also that's interesting that Allah said masajid, plural. Because now we're going to go from the direction of one masjid to another masjid as the ayat continue, inshallah ta'ala. وَقَالُوا اتَّخَذَ اللَّهُ وَلَدًا سُبْحَانَهُ. Now look, in this ayah, when they forbade the masajid of Allah, forbade from the masajid of Allah, of course that's alluding to the Quraysh. Now look at the next ayah. Allah says, وَقَالُوا اتَّخَذَ اللَّهُ وَلَدًا. They said Allah has taken a son. Who's this talking about? It's actually talking about the Jews and the Christians. وَقَالَتُ الْيَهُودُ عُزَيْرٌ ibn Allah. They're included too. And of course, what the Christians say is known. So both those groups are referred to. So all three groups come up again. They were mentioned in summary form in the first ayah of this passage, and now they're coming up again. So Allah says, وَقَالُوا اتَّخَذَ اللَّهُ وَلَدًا سُبْحَانَهُ. He's far too perfect and above that claim. Subhanahu, to declare, comes from, tasbih. Sabbaha yusabbihu. And sabah in Arabic is swimming or floating. The idea of subhanallah, when we say subhanallah, you know what that means? It means there's a status we have declared for Allah, the status of perfection. And that floats where it is. It remains perfect. To bring it down, anything below that would be to try to make it drown, to bring it down from where it deserves to be. So whenever someone says something inappropriate about Allah, the thing to say is subhanahu. No, He's above that. He remains perfect. So that's how we understand that phrase, subhanahu. So this hideous claim is being made by certain groups. اتَّخَذَ اللَّهُ وَلَدًا. That Allah took a son. So Allah says He's above and beyond that. He's too perfect for that. That's the expression subhanahu. بَلْ لَهُ مَا فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. Rather, it is only to Him that the entire heavens and the earth belong. And this belonging is important too. Because what happens in these theologies where Allah is given, or God is given children, that the dominions of the skies and the earth are shared. So for example, it began with, out of His love, the Lord sent His Son, Jesus Christ, all of that. Then what happens slowly? It transitions. Their aqidah, they change. Their aqa'id change. And they transition into Jesus being Lord. Right? Then they'll say Jesus is Lord. Then they'll say, the kingdom of Jesus, etc., etc. In other words, they'll keep taking further and further steps and start giving Isa alayhi salam mulk. Start attributing mulk to Him. And so this problem is being solved here. So Allah says, بَلْ لَهُ مُلْكُ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. No, He possesses the dominion and the ownership of the skies and the earth. كُلٌّ لَهُ قَانِتُونَ. Everything is subservient to Him. Everything is subservient to Him. And someone might counter-argue, no, not everything is subservient to Him. The kuffar are not subservient to Him. The munafiq is not subservient to Allah, in submission to Allah. How can Allah say, kullun lahu qanitun? First of all, the siyaq of the ayah, as-samawat wal-ard, the skies and the earth. In other words, it's referring to things other than human beings. All of creation around you is submissive to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But the other thing also is, even if it included human beings, even the kafir, his heart, his veins, his brain, his muscles, the functioning of his eyes, the ability of him to hear, these abilities also submit to Allah, whether he misuses them or not. The functions we have, like the ability to breathe, his lungs have submitted to Allah. He commands them to breathe and they breathe. And He commands them to stop breathing and they stop breathing. So in that sense, كُلٌّ لَهُ قَانِتُونَ بَدِيعُ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. He is the initiator. In philosophy they say creation ex nihilo, which means creation out of nothing. Creation out of nothing. Because creation could be, you took wood and created a table, right? But badi' means create something out of nothing. Innovate something entirely new, with no previous ingredients. So badi'u samawati wal ard, the initiator, the original creator of the skies and the earth, إِذَا قَضَى أَمْرًا, whenever He would declare a matter, فَإِنَّمَا يَقُولُ لَهُ كُن فَيَكُونُ. Then it's only for Him to say, be, this issue the command of existence, be, come to exist, that's kun, fayakun, then it exists, then it comes into existence. And this is important to say every time the theology, especially of the Christian community, is mentioned in the Quran, you will find usually kun fayakun comes up. With Isa alayhi salam especially, kun fayakun comes up. Why? Because this idea of Him being the Son, Allah is explaining, yes, it defied the natural order that you're used to, mother and father begetting a child. Why this theology even developed is because He's born of a virgin mother. So they had to figure out a father somehow. So that's the idea of, attributing fatherhood to Allah Azza wa Jal. But He says, no, this is a matter of kun fayakun. So kun fayakun in Arabic, in the Quran especially, is used when things happen out of what you expect nature to do. For miraculous things, for things that defy the norm. This is the kun of Allah. This is kalimat kun. My teacher used to say about this kalima that, when a teacher gives a dars or a reminder or advice, or somebody gives you good counsel, things like that, or you're listening to a khutbah, the words are coming out of the speaker's mouth and they're going into your ear, but they haven't entered your heart yet. And he could be speaking to you, the Imam could be speaking to you for 10 years, and everything entered the ear, but none of it entered the heart. And one day Allah decided to say kun to one of His words. To one of His words. And then that word went from the ear all the way to the heart. But that getting into the heart, the word entering and penetrating the heart and having that effect, that's actually from the command of Allah. It's a miraculous thing when light meets light. That's from the amr of Allah. Right? It's a beautiful thing. So إِذَا قَضَى أَمْرًا فَإِنَّمَا يَقُولُ لَهُ كُن فَيَكُونُ. So now in this passage, even though I'm not finished with the passage, inshallah we'll do it tomorrow, bi'idhnihi. We have a summarized discussion of 3 groups. And all 3 groups are important in this surah. Even though the surah is Madani, these 3 groups are critical to understand, and their relationships are important to understand in understanding Surah al-Baqarah. And as the ayat go further, you'll start to see that. Why that's important that we keep these 3 groups in mind in our development of understanding in this surah. Barakallahu li wa lakum fil Qur'an al-Hakim, wa nafa'ni wa iyyakum bil ayati wa dhikr al-Hakim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.